Ever feel like you're just swimming in information, but maybe missing the really crucial bits?
Yeah, like you want the important ideas, but fast, without wading through everything.
Exactly. And that's pretty much what we do here. We take sources you're curious about and, well, we try to boil them down to the key insights for you.
We're sort of pulling out the essence, giving you that shortcut to feeling informed.
So today we're digging into a really interesting piece one of you sent over. It's an essay, Architecture for Our Times.
Right, by Howard Eilenberger from 1962, published by Rice University, part of a series, apparently, trying to get people talking about architecture.
And what's cool is the perspective. It's not some, like, established architect looking back.
No, it's a fourth-year design student. He was given this assignment to design with words instead of lines. Kind of a neat idea.
It really is a fresh take.
Yeah.
And, okay, he focuses a lot on Houston back then, but he makes a point that these problems, he thought they were nationwide. So our mission today, listener, is to unpack Eilenberger's critique from 62, see what he was seeing, and, figure out what might still be relevant for understanding our own buildings and cities now, without all the heavy jargon.
Sounds good. Where does he start?
Well, it's interesting. He kicks it off with a kind of disclaimer, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. He sort of says, up front, look, I'm not trying to be some angry young man.
Right. Which kind of suggests he knew that was a thing, that kind of critique.
Uh-huh. But even saying that, you immediately sense he's got some pretty strong feelings bubbling under the surface.
Totally. He says he's not doing the usual indictments like he mentions fountainheads. So steering clear of the dramatic, maybe fictionalized stuff.
But then he actually starts describing the architecture he sees around him in 1962.
And he does not hold back.
No, not at all. After that initial sort of throat clearing, his critique is, well, pretty sharp. He describes this ugly hodgepodge.
Yeah, that mix of machined modern and, what was it, trumped up traditional. He clearly wasn't seeing harmony there.
Not at all. Makes you picture this kind of jarring visual landscape.
And he gives specific examples, like all the advertising signs, those big enameled placards screaming, eat, buy, sleep.
Oh, yeah. Blazing neon, fluorescent lights. Basically hiding the buildings themselves. You can just imagine it.
It's like the architecture gets lost under all that commercial noise. Does that ring any bells for today?
Well, maybe not physical signs in the same way everywhere, but you could argue today's digital billboards or even just the constant online ad barrage. It's a similar kind of visual overload, right? Competing for attention.
That's a good point. A digital version of the same problem, maybe. And then he gets into the suburbs.
The sprawl.
Yeah, this huge expansion onto farmland, these divvied up tracts.
Yeah.
He sounds genuinely dismayed about losing that green space.
It's that tension, isn't it? Needing places for people to live versus preserving the environment. Still a huge issue today, obviously.
Definitely. And he asks this, like, almost cynical question. Were things ever really that great architecturally?
Right? Even in primitive times, with their picturesque huts. He's questioning that whole idea of some past golden age.
What do you make of that? Just being realistic.
I think so. He's pushing back against romanticizing the past, saying, look, every era has its issues, let's not pretend otherwise. But then he asks the big question, what is architecture anyway?
Yeah, he's not just complaining, he wants a definition.
And he lands on Frank Lloyd Wright. That quote clearly resonated with him.
Architecture is life itself taking form.
The truest record of life.
Yeah.
It's not just about bricks and mortar. It's about how we live, what we value, showing up in built form.
That's a much bigger idea, isn't it?
It really is. Eilenberger sees architecture as this great spirit almost, something that reflects us, our human nature, our circumstances. It's dynamic.
Okay, so if architecture reflects life, then he makes the next logical step.
Which is?
That an architecture for our times is synonymous with an architecture of our times. Basically, what we build is a direct result of how we live and work.
Exactly. So if the architecture looks flawed to him,
then the flaws must be in the society itself.
Precisely. He talks about ugly morals, superficial motives, this drive for financial security above all else, which he thinks crowds out, any real appreciation for beauty or quality in buildings.
What kind of ugly morals do you think he meant back in 62?
Well, he really zooms in on consumerism, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah. He calls Americans money grubbers, obsessed with getting the good life through buying stuff.
He uses that great example of the expensive car, worth so much less the second you drive it off the lot.
Right. And he says the architecture people are buying is just like that car, focused on image, status, immediate gratification, not lasting value or, good design.
Does that sound familiar at all today?
Maybe just a little. That tension is definitely still around. Wanting quick, shiny things, maybe without looking too closely at the substance. You can see that in some construction today, for sure. Speed and cost.
Sometimes trumping quality and real thought.
Yeah. And Eilenberger says this leads to commercial standards, taking over from artistic standards in architecture. The main goal becomes the sale, the profit.
Not necessarily the creation of something meaningful or well-crafted. It's a classic conflict.
And he sees real results from this, like skilled craftsmanship, getting too expensive, priced out. And for houses, he thinks architects are getting pushed aside by contractors and developers. He calls them Sharpies, just because they can build cheaper and faster.
So the architect's expertise, the design thinking, gets devalued. It becomes about delivering a product, a commodity.
Right. And he gets why people buy these houses. You need somewhere to live now. Maybe you think you'll move soon anyway for a job.
So the convenience, the immediate availability, it often wins out over waiting for something maybe better designed, but that takes longer. It's a trade-off.
A trade-off people still make constantly.
So what's readily available then, in his view?
He sees this headlong rush back into the arms of traditionalism.
Yeah.
But not in a good way.
The trumped-up traditional again.
Exactly. New houses dressed up in old styles. He compares it to the nouveau riche in the late 1800s, just grabbing fancy bits from the past, plundering the past, he calls it.
So it's a critique of a superficiality, right?
Yeah.
Using historical styles like wallpaper without really understanding them or connecting them to how people live now.
Yeah, like putting on a costume. He actually says he can't imagine entering some of these new houses other than in costume.
Wow. That really hits home. The feeling of inauthenticity, like the house style and the actual lives inside don't match up.
It's about honesty and design, isn't it? Architecture should reflect its own time, its own people.
Not just be a mishmash of historical references used carelessly.
And he blames the developers too. Calls it careless, prosperous dishonesty. Just churning out these cheap copies of home sweet home cookie-cutter houses.
Driven by profit, without real concern for the quality of the environment they're creating.
He does offer a glimmer of hope, an exception. He points to Mr. Eichler's homes out on the West Coast. Tract homes, but he calls them an outstanding example of good design in that context.
Eichler, right. What did he like about them?
Their modern simplicity. Clean lines, standard forms, but used thoughtfully. He saw them as a kind of neutral backdrop for life.
So the style wasn't shouting at you.
Exactly. Individuality came from the people living there, how they used the space, not from fake shutters or columns. And he said they fit well together in their developments.
That's a really key point. Mass housing doesn't have to be bad design. It can be done thoughtfully, even with constraints.
Yeah, it shows good design isn't just about fancy details. It's about function, proportion, creating good spaces for living.
Interesting. Okay, so what about bigger buildings? Commercial, industrial?
Surprisingly, he saw more progress there back in '62. He felt that modern ideas, logic, simplicity, honesty were actually being applied more in those buildings.
Really? Why did he think that was?
You figured things like automation and just fierce business competition forced a more practical approach. You had to be efficient.
So less room for fussy decoration, more focus on function.
Pretty much. Leading to these naked structures of concrete, steel, glass.
Right.
He saw that as more truthful, more representative of the time.
The skeleton showing through?
Right. But even those, he says, are kind of vulnerable until they get filled in. And then he makes this really sobering comparison. He draws a line from our modern developments all the way back to, like, the slums around the Acropolis or the rubble of the Pantheon.
Wow. Heavy.
Yeah. He's asking, are we thinking about the legacy? Are we building things that will just be forgotten rubble too? Are we taking that responsibility seriously?
It really makes you pause. Thinking about the permanence or lack thereof of what we build. Are we building for now or for longer?
And that leads him to this brilliant analogy, the assorted cookies one.
Assorted cookies? How does that work?
He compares skyscrapers to cookies in a tin. They look a bit different on the outside, different shapes, different frosting, but underneath, pretty much the same.
Ah, I see. Driven by companies wanting something different and in a hurry.
Exactly. So you get superficial variety, but maybe not real quality, or what he calls flavor, talent, truth.
That's a very clever way to put it, critiquing that pressure for novelty over substance, especially in corporate architecture.
Totally. And from there, he calls for more harmony, for indigenous design, architecture that actually fits its place.
Responding to the local environment?
Yes. He slams the idea of just copying New York glass towers in Houston's climate makes no sense.
So
Like,
we need buildings suited to the local conditions, the latitude.
so what would that look like today? More focus on sustainability, climate responsive design, local materials?
I think, though, less of a generic global style, more rootedness. And he's definitely not about quick fixes. No, just putting a new facade on a bad building, facelifting, he calls it.
So no superficial changes. What's the real solution then, in his view?
It comes down to education. He stresses this again and again.
Educating who?
Architects.
Everyone. The public. We need to teach people to actually see their environment, appreciate materials, understand how space and color and form affect us.
So it's about cultivating public taste, public awareness.
Yes, because he believes public demand is what ultimately shapes architecture. A society gets the architecture it asks for, basically.
That puts a lot of responsibility on the public.
It does. And he uses that Manhattan Island tableau image, again, like the old story of trading trinkets for land. He sees modern Americans trading cash for architectural baubles and beads because they don't know any better.
Because they lack discernment.
Yeah.
So the value is based on ignorance or just passing fads.
Which, he argues, is no foundation for good architecture. You need informed judgment.
Makes sense. So we need to know the difference between a bauble and a real jewel, architecturally speaking.
Exactly. And he warns against big, whimsical projects, too. Those neo-medieval castles or space Gothic things.
Fantasy stuff.
Yeah. He says fantasy is fine, but it belongs in Disneyland, not dictating our everyday cities and buildings.
So keep this serious work of building cities grounded in reality and honesty.
Right. Because if we don't learn to discern, if we stay architecturally illiterate, he paints a pretty bleak picture.
Let me guess. More slums. Ugly sprawl.
Yep. And an aesthetically degenerate society more interested in TV than the world outside their window.
Ouch. So the core message is...
Learn to discern. That's the key.
Yeah.
We, the public, need to learn the difference between the junk and the gems. We need to demand logic, honesty, integrity in what gets built.
He has that modified proverb, doesn't he?
Yeah. Learn to discern that you may demand that you may receive. It puts the power and the responsibility right back on us.
If we demand better, we might actually get it.
And that's where his optimism comes in at the end.
I'll
He
see.
thinks if or when the public does learn to discern and demand quality.
Then architects will finally be seen and valued as artists again, not just, business people fulfilling a contract.
A potential heyday for architects driven by an educated public. It's quite a vision.
It really is.
So wrapping up our deep dive into this 1962 essay, some big themes really stick out, don't they?
Definitely. That strong critique of superficiality, how consumer culture can warp architecture.
The need for honesty and logic in design, and maybe most importantly, the power of public demand. If people know what to ask for.
And it makes you think, looking back from now,
Yeah.
how many of Eilenberger's concerns from '62 still feel relevant?
Right. Are we still maybe choosing shiny surfaces over solid foundations, metaphorically speaking?
Are we still prioritizing speed and trends over lasting quality and how our cities grow? It's worth asking.
He really is. So listener, here's the final thought to chew on. Thinking about Eilenberger's arguments, what baubles and beads, what superficial architectural trends or values might we be trading our resources for today, maybe without even realizing it?
Maybe take a fresh look around your own environment this week. See it through that lens of discernment he was calling for.